it really does train them to become thinkers for the future. It's an imbibed sort of skill set from a very young age. So when we talk about best fit in terms of a curriculum, how best is a student going to really learn? What is their context? How do they assimilate knowledge? And I think no one curriculum is better than the other. It just has to be suited to a student's way of learning.
If I was a typical, I don't know, in my idea of an IB parent, I would be worried if my son is in like class 5 and he doesn't know tables.
Parental anxiety is we actually treat our children like an employer would treat the employee. We need to know the learning outcomes. Every appraisal cycle, we need a clear assessment of what the child has learned or not learned. But is learning really a linear process?
Hello and welcome to another edition of In Focus Weekend. I'm G. Sampath. In recent times, India has seen a growing number of IB schools. In fact, having your kid in an IB school has become something of a status symbol, although that may or may not be the primary motive for most parents. But many parents, regardless of their reasons for choosing an IB school, face a number of confusing questions and dilemmas. For instance, how does the pace of learning for an IB student compare with that of a child in a CBSE school? Will an IB curriculum help a child who wants to sit for IIT or medical entrance exams in India? And if the idea is to prep them for higher education abroad, how do you decide which stream, which country and which university? In this episode, we get clarity on everything you wanted to know about IB education but didn't know whom to ask. Joining us today are Sobhana K Nair, senior political journalist at The Hindu, who is here in her capacity as an IB parent. And we are also joined by IB expert Nayantara Handa, who leads the careers and university guidance team at the British School, New Delhi. Nayantara, thank you so much for joining us. Sobhana, welcome to InFocus. So today, I have a lot of questions. I'm sure she does as well. So to start with, Nayantara, I'll begin with you. You know, many of the parents whose children are in IB schools now, they themselves have grown up in a CBSE school or a state board or ICSE schools or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
So their expectations sometimes do not quite match with what the IB curriculum offers, what the IB pedagogy is like. So, and as a result of that, many parents have some kind of confusion, some misconceptions maybe. So you're like heading the career counseling team at the British School. So what has been your experience? You must have interacted with IB parents, quote unquote, quite a bit.
Well, because of the very nature of the IB, the fact that it finds its foundations and really is rooted in inquiry-based learning, concept-based learning, it encourages students to actually consider their local and the global concepts and sort of bring it all together in the way that they're really thinking and assimilating knowledge. We actually find, I've seen in my career that it encourages students to actually think independently, to become independent learners, and yes, take the onus for their own learning. I think that's very, very important. So it really does train them to become thinkers for the future. It's an imbibed sort of skill set from a very young age. And because the mind is being trained in that way, they also become very independent in their own thoughts, in their own opinions. But those are thoughts and opinions that are actually grounded and rooted in genuine knowledge, right? So if we look at, say, for example, the IB learner profile, there are many tenets in the IB learner profile, but I can sort of elaborate just on a few of them maybe.
What is an IB learner profile? I haven't heard of a CBSE learner profile. So how does this?
So an IB learner profile basically is about qualities that IB learners should have as they progress in their IB journey. And those are the qualities that pretty much run parallel to that journey or students assimilate during the course of being IB learners. So some of those are collaboration, independent inquiry and thinking, being a risk taker, for example, empathy and compassion. So all of these really, I think, come together to form a whole individual, if we were to look at it from that perspective. I think with regard to the national curriculums also, though, I would have to say that students develop, I think, the ability to be able to simply put, work really hard because they're very rigorous curriculums and they're also very demanding curriculums. So it means that students have to develop much like the IB, time management skills to deal with that type of rigor, to deal with that type of testing. They have to develop a very sharp memory and a very sharp focus. And yes, it might be a little more streamlined in its orientation eventually, and the IB might be a little more broad-based in its orientation. But I think both curriculums are fantastic, and a lot depends on what kind of a learner a student is. So when we talk about best fit in terms of a curriculum, how best is a student going to really learn? What is their context? How do they assimilate knowledge? And I think no one curriculum is better than the other. It just has to be suited to a student's way of learning. And I think a lot of mums of today and parents of today actually encourage learning over and above the curriculum as well, right? No matter what the curriculum is. So like we were talking about earlier, just in terms of additional reading, listening to podcasts, maybe a little bit of travel, all of those things are really ways of learning to be able to supplement what you are getting from textbooks or classroom discussions or academic research. So I think both curriculums, all types of curriculums really have their very, very strong points. It just depends on how a student is able to acclimatize and adjust. And then, whichever curriculum works for them is great.
Right. I mean, thank you for that explanation, Nayantara. I really appreciate that. But one of the two things you said, an IB curriculum encourages a student to have critical thinking, independent thinking, think for himself or herself. But, many parents today may not necessarily prioritize those aspects. Many of them would want their child to get a good job, have a competitive edge in going to universities and qualifying in entrance exams and so on. So, Sobhana, coming to you with this question. So, you are an IB parent. You had a choice to put your son in whichever board you wanted, you could have. But you chose to enroll him in an IB school. And you yourself, if I'm not mistaken, did not study in an IB school. You went to some other board. So how would you compare your experience with your son's ongoing experience, number one? And number two, what motivated you to sort of decide on an IB school for your kid?
I think it was my experience itself which informed my decision to put him in IB. Forget about labels. Okay, I did not pick IB for the labeling or IGSC for the labeling of these various labels. I actually picked a method of pedagogy which I thought would be a better fit for my child. I hated my time in school. I did not like the way CBSE curriculum was fashioned at that time. I'm sure right now it has come a long way. They have introduced several sheets.
What about the CBSE curriculum did you not like?
The whole memorize and recall.
Rote learning.
I mean, the fact that everything you had to... in CBSE, it's a very... or CBSE, ICSC... more or less
many state boards
state boards, it's a very narrow path that you are told to tread, and you aren't allowed to do any slip here or there. And as you were just saying, Nayantara was just saying about thinking freely, having critical thinking. For example, painting the sky pink, that's not allowed, that's not done. You have to basically, you're working within a certain limit. The English textbook, for example, in my time had about 10-12 chapters. It had 10-12 stories, and I would want to read more. Or the maths textbook would have absolutely no history. I mean, maths is an interesting subject. It is almost like a language, but it was so straight-jacketed. We memorized tables, whereas so the difference that I see in my son's learning is he has never ever memorized tables. He's never had to sit down and 2 multiplied by 2 is so and so or whatever.
If I was a typical, I don't know, in my idea of an IB parent, I would be worried if my son is in like class 5 and he doesn't know tables.
Exactly my point, So I think as we were discussing long before we sat down for this discussion, I think that a lot of our education systems are not really aimed at teaching our children. It is actually aimed at managing the parental anxieties. Now, the parental anxiety is we actually treat our children like an employer would treat the employee. We need to know the learning outcomes. We need to know what that, every appraisal cycle, we need a clear assessment of what the child has learned or not learned. But is learning really a linear process? Is my question. I don't think it is a linear process. I think you learn, you may just retain one little thing at that point, but which will come back to you. So many times it has happened when we are writing. We would have read something a few weeks back, it will just come to us. So my reason for choosing IB, let's put it, I chose an alternate pedagogical method, which I thought will give my son a vaster canvas than I had. And he will not be boxed in, and he will be able to read far more, think freely. Those are the reasons. So I did not even think about which are the universities open to him. Maybe these are the anxieties that I'll have a few years from now. But at that point of decision making, that was not my thought.
Maybe is she in a minority? Do most parents have this reason? I like the IB pedagogy, so I want that my kid to go to an IB school, or is it more about giving them some kind of an edge in terms of opportunities for higher studies abroad? Isn't that the primary motive for putting a child in an IB school, because it sort of preps you for a university, college abroad in a university?
Actually, if we examined it, both those things are linked, aren't they? Because, yes, IB delivers a certain type of learning and a certain way of learning. I'm just going to digress for 2 minutes. Just to your point, your very valid point of not boxing a student in. I think one of my favorite examples that I give students is that if you have a tall tree in a field, right, and you've got a cheetah in front of that tree, and you've got a fish in a fish bowl in front of that tree, and you've got a snake and a bird and a hippopotamus, and you tell them all to climb that tree, they're not all going to be able to climb it. They all have their different strengths and different weaknesses, and can thrive and do and exceed and do really well in different types of environments. But not everyone is cut out for the same environment. So I think, to your point, yes, the IB offers a certain amount of flexibility and freedom of thought to be able to examine and interpret knowledge in a certain way. To your point of why parents are choosing possibly the IB curriculum, let's leave the schools out of it, because yes, many schools now offer the IB curriculum, but why are parents really choosing that route? And is it only because of universities? No, I think both things are actually really linked, because if the mind is trained in a particular way at a certain age and continues to be trained in that way, right, for all of the reasons we have just discussed, those are the students who are going to actually thrive and succeed at universities. In a university setting, there is so much emphasis on actually doing your work on your own, independent learning, spending time in the library, an essay-driven approach. I mean, if we look at, say, Oxbridge, for example, just as an example, there are many universities out there, but if we take that as an example, the curriculum or the papers are taught in supervision or tutorial style. What does that mean? You're meeting with your supervisor and tutor once a week to discuss a particular topic on which you then have to go back and write a 2,000-word essay. So the approach is all essay-based. You're sitting in the library and doing your research. So if your mind is not already trained that way in school or in your formative years, then actually it becomes difficult to make that switch when you're at university. So I think, yes, from that perspective, this particular way of learning goes a long way. Do universities have a preference? I meet over 100 universities a year. No, they say that they don't, because their emphasis is also on access. They want to be able to give students from diverse curriculums and diverse contexts the same chance. I mean, there could be a student who could be applying from a smaller town or a city who has not had access to the IB, or whose parents cannot afford that curriculum or that type of schooling. So are we saying then that that student is a lesser individual than anybody else? Of course not. Universities, therefore, are assessing according to context. What best has a student made of their particular context? And then we'll take it from there. That's how they're actually assessing applications. So, to your earlier point, no, I think parents are choosing a particular way of learning that will see students through their high school journey and help them to then transition into university. But importantly, in this very ever changing and diverse landscape, which is the world today, I think give young people the ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn. So actually, it's developing a certain set of skills that is going to see them through the academic journey as high school students or university students, but then also through life and into their careers.
Right. I mean, that's very well said, Nayantara. Coming back to the parental anxiety question, Shobhana, I mean, you as an IB parent, you must be interacting with other parents as well. And you might be, I don't know, sharing certain social media groups also with them. So what kind of misconceptions or anxieties, apart from this thing about, homework, for instance? I mean, this, you mentioned about wanting to have clear outcomes in terms of learning what they have learned, what kind of assessment is happening. So what kind of anxieties do they have around their child's experience in an IB school, which may not really match their expectations based on their own, journey in a CBSE school? Because you may not have the kind of homework which you've had. You may not have the kind of exams, the memorization, like the tables example we talked about. So are there any other like obvious confusions that you've come across?
Yeah. So very recently, only last week, I think there was a science assessment, summative assessment in school, and the school group went suddenly, somewhere in the afternoon, people started texting, so which chapters are coming from which textbook? And that I found it very hilarious, because this is the generation of CBSE parents who are bringing their CBSE anxieties into this new curriculum that they are not yet familiar with. See, this is again the thing that we are so used to, and we've seen our parents do this to us, taking leave from work to sit with us for the board exams, making sure that we have memorized everything. They would sit across from you and ask you a question, and then tally with the reply in the textbook. It had to fit. Here, this is a concept-based learning. This is not the textbooks. Essentially, any good textbook essentially is a textbook for the teacher and not for the student. It is the guide, the guardrails for the teacher to follow the curriculum. It is not for the students to memorize out of that textbook. But we have come from that tunnel.
My kid is in class 4, and when he went to class 4 from class 3, another parent wanted his class 3 question papers.
I was asked for class 5 notes. Can you please give me notes? I didn't know that. See, that is the whole. So I found it very, very hilarious that, you are still, though you have made the switch, you are still stuck in that thing of trying to work with your child, sit across with your child every day, learn chapter by chapter. That's not how.
So would it be fair to say that the IB approach of pedagogy does not give a sufficient sense of participation to the Indian parent?
I think so. I'm sure my child is too young right now for me to make a very sweeping statement. But what the common complaints that I've heard is, there isn't enough homework. How are they learning if there isn't enough homework every day? Fair enough. Valid point. Then the question is, you don't see, because in CBSE or any other board, you have unit tests. So every 2 months or 1 month, fairly where your child is, how much he has learned. In this case, it is not as structured. It is, you don't get instant validation. It's which is what we crave for. That if we have put in X number of hours, if we have paid X number of fees, then you should have a concrete outcome. One of the other anxieties which I personally have is, though I love this pedagogical method, I think the fees is just far too steep. And I just hope that there are more schools that embrace this method. Even government schools should.
But why are the fees so high?
That probably she'll be able to answer better as to why the fees is so high.
Maybe not that well.
I guess because teachers need to be paid well
Yes,
is
and they have to be
one
trained as
answer.
well in a
I mean,
particular
we are used to teachers getting chronically underpaid. Maybe that is one reason. But would you agree with what you were just chatting about, Nayantara, that the IB doesn't the role of the participation of the parent in an IB context is substantially less, if not very different?
Yeah, I mean, I think the IB is a learner's curriculum, right? So who is the learner? The student. It's really just as simple as that. So if the student is the learner, they have to take the agency for their own learning, of course, very ably assisted by their teachers and their gurus and their schools in which they're at. I do think that parents, though, and I've seen this in my experience, play a very good supportive role if they can, at times and not always, but help their children with other important facets that aid in the IB, such as time management, for example. How do you manage your time effectively? It's a rigorous curriculum. Of course it is. I want to add an adjective to that and say it's a wonderfully rigorous curriculum. How do you make the best of it? How do you get the most out of it if you manage your time effectively? So I think there, parents play a very crucial role because students are not always able to make the most of the time that is afforded to them. There, I think parents can definitely help. I think parents can also play a very supportive and encouraging role in enabling their children to do the things that are going to help them help the students to become good IB learners. Additional reading, not spending so much time in front of the television. Honestly, I mean, these are very day-to-day things, but they're very important. Or playing video games and things like that. All our children succumb to this. I think it's a global phenomenon.
It is difficult. It would be difficult for a child to manage their time well in the absence of structure, right? CBSE gives you a structure. I'm using CBSE as a placeholder for any non-IB board. When there is structure, you sort of are driven to do certain things at certain times. Whereas when you have more freedom, a lot depends on your discipline.
Yeah, a lot does depend on your discipline, but the IB also has a structure. There is a system of assessments. There is a system of sort of when you're handing in your IAs and your internal assessments, your internal orals, your extended essay, your theory of knowledge assignments. There's a place and a structure for everything in terms of submissions and so in terms of testing. It's definitely there. It's just a little more self-driven. But those are the skills they're going to need at university as well, right? They're going to have to be self-driven. They're going to have to learn how to, learn how to manage their time well. They're going to have to put in that additional work on their own. So really, in a sense, it is a preparatory curriculum for what is to come in terms of undergraduate learning.
Right. On this aspect, Nayantara, there is, when you spoke about extended essays, theory of knowledge, etc. So, based on all these elements, the general perception is that IB education is great for a liberal arts course in a higher university, a higher education, a college or a university. It may not be that okay for a STEM future, a STEM education. Is that a correct perception?
No, I don't think that's a correct perception. And I'll address this question, I think, in two parts. Liberal arts, yes, it's great. Because when you look at the structure of the IB, especially in years 11 and 12, you do have to do an English language. You do have to do a foreign language. You do have to do a science. You will have to do a humanities subject. And then for your sixth subject, you either double up with a science or a humanities or a creative and performing. And then you have the components such as the extended essay and theory of knowledge. So in that sense, of course, it's very interdisciplinary because you are doing...
Would there be an extended essay in mathematics?
You could choose your extended essay in any topic that you want to out of the subjects that you are studying. Within the subjects that you're studying also, there's an essay-driven approach in terms of the internal assessment, which is roughly a 2,500-word essay-driven assessment. So every subject has its own essay-driven components. In addition to that, there's the 4,000-word extended essay in a topic of your choice, right? So there's a lot of essay writing. In that sense, of course, it's interdisciplinary because you are linking knowledge also from different areas and aspects of learning. Having said that, it also allows a student to specialize because should they want to go into medicine, for example, they do have the option to study biology and chemistry. If they want to sit a medical exam within India, the IB allows for a student to take the 3 sciences, physics, biology, and chemistry.
Could you actually expand a little more? Because this is one of the biggest, one of the anxieties that can an IB student sit for IIT JEE?
Yes, they can. And I've seen that in my experience as well. Because, in India, for example, right, they need the 3 sciences for medicine. So they would need to do the biology, chemistry, and physics. But the IB allows for that. It's not a no that a student can only take these 2 sciences and not the third. They most definitely can. So yes, of course, if they need to prepare for the NEET, if they need to prepare for the JEE, if they need to prepare for law exams, for example, the CLAT or the ALIT or any of those exams within the Indian context, they're most definitely able to. Sometimes, is there not a clash, but is there sometimes an overlap in the timelines? Yes, in all honesty, there can be, especially during that May-June time. Say I think it's for the NEET or say for the CUET for Delhi University, for example. But students who are determined to do what they need to do. Actually, in any case, these exams are so competitive that they would prepare well in advance. They're not waiting for that last 1 month or those last 2 months. Their preparation starts so much in advance.
No, in terms of timeline, Nayantara, they might be able to sit for the exam, regardless of what the timeline clashes are. But in terms of applying for admission, if the IB results come at a different time, and the time when you need to apply with your mark sheets, etc., is at an odd time. Isn't there a clash?
There isn't, because they're giving the entrance tests, no? For everything. So for Delhi University, for example, if they're sitting the CUET, they have a provisional mark sheet in any case, what is called the predicted grades, high school transcript from the IB. Of course, the final results will also go. But in the interim, they would have given the CUET, they would have sat the examination.
But I was under the impression that an IB student can only apply to private universities in India. Can they apply to Delhi University, or Hindu College, all these? We
have IB students applying. Maybe not in as many numbers, but we definitely do have IB students applying. Also, in terms of alternatives now, if we talk about those, of course, there's Ashoka, there's Flame, there's Kriya, there's Amity, there's OP Jindal, excellent for law and so many other things. Now, we have so many international universities that are coming into India as well. Southampton has opened campus just beyond Gurgaon. They're taking their first batch this year. Courses sort of focus on marketing, management, finance. So many other UK universities, Bristol, York, I think it's Liverpool, a couple of Australian universities, Victoria, for one, are all coming into India now and setting up campuses.
So which Indian universities don't take IB students? Because I have this in my head. There are some public universities, maybe, I don't know, Calcutta University or Madras University. Some colleges don't.
There would be very few. I can't list them off. There would be very, very few. But now, because most colleges have an entrance exam, that entrance exam is what actually is the most important component in terms of an intake for a student. Okay. So there's not really that much of a restraint.
So there is no issue with regard to IB students appearing for competitive exams in India, any competitive exam?
No, unless there is a definitive clash in dates.
Okay.
In which case, of course, then they might not choose the IB curriculum. They might choose a curriculum that works very well for their own long-term plan. Or sometimes we have students who might purposefully choose to take a gap year and then sit that examination because they actually want to assimilate a little bit of experiential learning as well in their area of interest. So, for example, we've had students who might have wanted to take a gap year and give the NEET a year later, but in the interim have actually done a lot of shadowing work at clinics or at hospitals because they're not allowed active work, but shadowing work, or might have wanted to do a little bit of additional research in an area of their choice in medicine. So they might purposefully actually take a year off to actually build on their academic portfolio and prepare for the exam and then give the exam a year later. So that is also an alternative.
Sobhana was asking about this IIT entrance examination. Many people, they believe, I don't know, I'm not an expert on these subjects, but they believe that the CBSE syllabus gives you some kind of an advantage in terms of these entrance exam preparations. Whatever you learn in your classroom, it is roughly the same. So the IB student who's doing whatever physics, chemistry, maths in whatever 16, 17 years old, would he be sort of covering the same terrain, or would he have to then take extra coaching, tuition, etc.? Or is this the wrong question because they're not looking at IIT at all? They're looking at somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, it could possibly be that they might not, in all honesty, be looking at an IIT. That might not be the best fit for them at that point in time. So, like I said earlier on in our conversation, I think all curriculums have advantages. That the curriculum really has to be linked into the type of learner that a student is going to be and what their future plans might actually be. And there's no right or wrong in that. Those plans could be different for each student. So really, I think a curriculum has to be chosen according to what the overall picture is. And this is what we always are advising students about in terms of university guidance as well. I mean, I know I'm pivoting just a little bit, but the plan isn't just about the curriculum or about the college thereafter. The plan is for life. So what is really going to work in that journey? Actually, the planning is for the next 10 or 15 years. So choose a curriculum that is actually workable for you and your long-term plans. I mean, in terms of family, in terms of plans for the child, in terms of affordability, geographical location, importantly, career. Where do you see your child ending up maybe in the next 10 or 15 years? We live in such a volatile world now. So I think everything links in a particular way.
Right. So your parent has gone through this thinking process we just outlined and has decided to enroll her kid in his or her kid in a IB school. Okay. So how do you, I mean, you are an expert in giving the kind of guidance a parent would need, a child would need for a long-term, career thinking. So how would a person decide which university, in which country, which stream their child should go to? Like at what stage in their process, in class 4, class 5? When do they think about these things, and how do you guide them in the right kind of fit, both in terms of subject or stream, whether somebody should go to STEM kind of a thing, or liberal arts, or which country, Oxbridge, Harvard, Australia, Canada, like there are so many different ways in which this can go.
No, that's true. And I think in this regard, I think early intervention is important. Don't get me wrong, children should enjoy their childhood. That's crucial too, because those are the foundational years. But careers are changing at a very rapid pace now. I think by the time students who are currently in class 8 or class 9 or class 6, like your son is, by the time they actually apply to university, many of the careers that exist now will have changed or will not be non-existent at that point in time. Also with the advent of artificial intelligence, I mean, things are moving at a very rapid pace. Having said that, there's also the other parallel that there's so many destinations now available in terms of undergraduate learning. There is, of course, the traditional US and UK, but increasingly now, I mean, if you look at Spain, you look at Netherlands, I'm just talking international universities now, but Spain, Netherlands, Australia, Finland, New Zealand, Canada was quite popular until recently. There are so many options with different types of universities that are available. So, in this setting, it can be quite confusing. How do parents and students actually choose what is going to be the best fit for them? Therefore, I think a research-based approach, quite earlier on, I think, say, class 8 onwards, makes, I think, for good and diligent choices. Now, how does that work? At least in the IB, when a student is in class 8 and 9, by the time they're in class 9 actually is when they have to start choosing their subjects for class 10, right? So they're going to be choosing what they want to actually do, still keeping the scope quite broad, but understanding then that they'll have to further streamline it in the IB, the final 2 IBDP years, right? So to actually understand what the options are available globally, when are they going to get that time to research? At least the initial research should be done in class 8 and 9 by the parents and by the students. How do they do that? Every school really, at least in the metro cities now, universities are traveling a lot for their fall recruitment. A lot of travel happens during August through to December. The reason for that travel is also for them to gather their market intelligence as to what kind of curriculums exist, what kind of schools exist, where are students looking, in the world to actually study. So really attend all those fairs and visits. Read up on the university websites. What is available? What does each course entail? Or at least within a broad area of interest. Now, university guidance plays a very important role we're helping students identify quite earlier on what their interest areas might be. I think the students who want to be engineers or doctors know quite earlier on because it's a very streamlined approach. But for a lot of
But
students,
isn't the class 8 too early to know what you're interested in? It took me like 25 years to
it is very early, but the world is becoming also quite a complex place. So I'm not saying that they have to make any definitive decisions. No, understanding that it's an evolving process, at least to be able to basically identify what the interest areas are. Are you more of a humanities student? Are you more of a science student? Are you more of a creative and performing student? Right? At least those broad-based areas will then help for a more streamlined approach. How to plan your subjects, how to plan what you want to do through your high school journey. What are the sort of high school opportunities that you want to take advantage of? Do you want to be in the science club, or are you more of an MUN person? Are you more of a debater, or do you want to be sort of in all the musical and artistic performances in your school? Because there is so much on offer, and because not that students are doing things for universities, but when we look at that aspect just for a minute, universities are saying that we don't want flash in the pan activities. Students have different interests, are good at different things, might not be good at certain things, that's fine. Pursue just one or two things, but pursue them consistently and with a sort of diligence to be able to have impact within your local context, within your school community. To just have impact, how would you have impact? Only if you're pursuing one or two things in a way that works for you, that is driven by your own passion and by your own interests. Are you in that also being collaborative? Are you including your peers? Are you including other members of your school or your outside community? How are you doing that? So to bring all of that together, it's important to chalk out a roadmap with regular interventions in terms of subject choices, in terms of sort of understanding a student's academic strengths or weaknesses, in terms of being able to define quite early what their interest areas might be, in terms of ensuring that students are able to make best the opportunities that exist within their school communities. But all of that has to be streamlined. So therefore, early intervention is important. Yes, you start broad-based and then the pyramid narrows, but that broad-based also has to have a certain structure.
That's very excellently put, Nayantara. Thank you so much. I think early intervention, a broad-based and a narrowing pyramid, and looking at a couple of areas where the child can make an impact collaboratively. I think that's a very nicely summarized answer. Sobhana, you want to have any further questions for her? Any thoughts?
No, I think I'll wait for the pod to get over to ask.
It is over now. Yeah, we are. I think I'm that's all I have for you in this podcast. Thank you so much, Nayantara. Thank you, Sobhana, for joining us.
Thank you.